Okay, it's 12 o'clock, top of the hour. Thank you everyone for joining us here today to talk about how to reduce your cyber risk using people, process, technology, insurance. Glad to welcome Scott Garcia from SmithBrothers and Bob Thomas from Kyber Security. They'll be going through the information today to help you understand what's involved in the evolution of cyber insurance and how and why that's changed over time. With that, I'm going to hand this over to our presenters. Gentlemen, take it over.
Thanks very much, Mike. My name's Bob Thomas. I'm one of the owners of Kyber Security. You saw by the list there all the acronyms associated. I'm a virtual CIO and Chief Information Security Officer for our clients. And I work with them every day to do planning and better their security and protection of their networks and their data. Scott?
Yep. Thanks, Bob. Scott Garcia. I'm with SmithBrothers Insurance. I'm a certified cyber risk manager. Basically, all that means is I help our clients and organizations manage the cyber risk from an enterprise cyber risk manager level. You really can't insure a risk until you know exactly what your risk is you need to have a good education on the size and depth of your risk before you insure it. So Scott Garcia with SmithBrothers.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Scott. Appreciate it. So we're going to talk a little bit about risk, of course, because that's what we're trying to protect here. But we first have to understand what we're trying to tackle, what we're trying to defend against, and at the crux of that is a data breach. Obviously, I think everybody on the call knows what a data breach is, but I think it just behooves us all to understand that we're on the same playing field here. It just doesn't mean somebody getting into your network or getting access to your email or any other information, but it's exposing that information from an unauthorized standpoint. So somebody gets in, let's just say cracks your email, and then harvests that information and uses it either maybe in a ransom capacity or just to sell on the dark web, which things are very easily marketable on the dark web. So that's a common place for people in the threat actor world to try to make money and turn over data that they've got to someone else. And I don't think at this point in time anybody's surprised by the fact that everybody's at risk, not just enterprise level companies that are targeted. We go back to the whole pipeline attack, and that was certainly a targeted attack to try to bring down not just a company, but a utility that was important for East Coast, Southeast Coast well-being. But individuals, small businesses, governments, and I think probably everybody could understand the government considering what's going on over with Russia and the Ukraine right now, how they could be targeted. So I think at this point we can understand how everyone's at risk and trying to figure out the best way to protect those, and if they're not protected, how easily they can be compromised. Next. And I think we're going to go through a little quick punch list of what kinds of information are typically out there at risk. And PII, there's obviously a bunch of acronyms associated with this stuff. Personally identifiable information. For the folks that are not aware, this was recently updated October 1st of 2021. The state of Connecticut put in a safe harbor act that we're going to talk a little bit about, and how if you protect your data and protect your network properly, you're not going to be subject to fines. But as part of that Safe Harbor Act, they updated notifications. So if you were breached and information were released, they have a specific list of personally identifiable information. We can share that list with you. We're happy to after this call, and links to that information. Personal protected health information is that's in the HIPAA world, and same thing with EPHI. Everybody's probably been familiar with that, how that's become very important over time as people's health information has been available out on the all sorts of portals, especially you start talking about hospital access and insurance portals. Those are critical to be highly regarded as protected information, and the utmost protection should be put in place. And then I think the others are across all sorts of organizations. Company confidential information. This could be proprietary information, could be financial information within a company. Really important intellectual property. We do some work with some law firms and patent folks where IP is really a critical item to try to protect and make sure that you've got only people that need access to have access. And we're going to talk a little bit about that going forward, about who has privileged access to systems and how you can rein that in. I think those are really important things to think about. How you protect the information, what's at risk, and if it were to fall into the wrong hands, what exactly is your exposure? Next. Client list. Boy, that's a, if you don't want your client list exposed out there or fall in the hands of your competitors, that's a real biggie as well. And thoughts around, what comes of a data breach, and we get called in. It's probably every 2 to 3 weeks, we get a call from somebody talking about, hey, it looks like I may have been compromised. We're missing money out of our bank account. What do we do? Can you help us? And, we have questions immediately that we ask. And some of these, come from the problem in delay of operations. Can I do what I need to do with my systems? Am I offline? Do I have to shut things down in order to rein in the breach? That's a lot of times that's a way that people try to limit the breach, is starting to shut down systems and try to find out exactly what got exposed and what's in play. Steep fines, we're going to talk a little bit more of that in the coming slide and exactly what those fines look like. One item that I was thinking about before, okay, maybe you can't process transaction and that creates delays. Maybe you're subject to fines. This is the Office of Civil Rights and Health and Human Services on the protected health information side for medical practices. This is a huge thing. But the state of Connecticut, from the Attorney General's office and Supreme Court, has the ability to levy fines as well, both from a civil perspective and a criminal. But I was thinking, somebody reaches in your bank account because they've now got credentials to look like you. That's hard money loss, not just delays. So there are steep financial penalties there. And I think you have to start to think downstream all of the other impacts that something of a breach might impact you. We've got your business branding. And this is coupled with damaged business reputation. These two, I think, work hand in hand. You might lose existing business from your clients because of mistrust. They don't think you've secured your network in a sufficient manner, and they may look elsewhere. Your brand has been, I don't know if I can say ruined, but certainly impacted. Legal issues. We were talking about fines. Okay, well, it's not just civil fines. It could be criminal activity because you weren't protecting the information, especially in a repeatable offense. There's escalating penalties with data breaches. Yeah, okay, the first time you might get somewhat of a pass. You get hit 2 and 3 times, they're going to throw the book at you. They're looking for folks that are not taking the message and taking it to heart. And your business reputation is going to be impacted. How do you have to hire a PR firm? What do you do once your brand has been impacted? You're going after new clients, trying to show how you're better than your competitors, and your brand is impacted by a loss like this. That's significant impact, not just today impact, but that's downstream damage. Next. So a little bit about the new Safe Harbor Act. Connecticut got way out in front of this. There's only 2 other states that even put a program like this in place. And what the Safe Harbor Act has brought to the table is the state of Connecticut is trying to incent businesses to better protect their data, their systems, and in doing so, they want to relieve the folks that put in these protections of penalties. So you've got to, it has to be a real protection. This isn't, I bought a firewall, but I left it in the package on the shelf and never put it in. The old HIPAA rules that didn't really have any teeth in them. This is, you've got to create, maintain, and comply with a written program of cybersecurity. It's got to be administered. It has to be technical, and there has to be physical safeguards for protection. So that means access to your building has to be in place, monitored access, logged, access to something like a server room, that has to be part of it. There have to be real protections in place all the way down the line. Tools, no antivirus, that's artificial intelligence and machine learning based, threat detection, all the pieces that make up a real cybersecurity plan. The 5 compliances that are listed there, PCI, which is credit card certifications, ISO 27000 series. So that's a level of documentation, procedures, process that is auditable by CPA firms. HIPAA, we talked a little bit about that before. Obviously in the medical world, there are annual risk assessments that have to be done. That's mandatory for all medical practices. And they've got to prove that they're doing not just security from a tool perspective, but they've got to be training their staff, and they've got to keep track of exactly what training is being done. How are they giving them security training? Is it book learning? Is it online? All that's tracked. Is it tested? Have the people pass the test? All of those pieces. Graham-Leach building. That Liability Act is some people call it SOX, but it is financial services related, so that they're putting protections in place because they're doing money management. Huge protections have to be in place for those folks. And the NIST CSF, so that's the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and CSF is Cybersecurity Framework. This is the plan that we work under. It is not a compliancy, it is a framework that you can be in alignment with. And if you're in alignment with that program, which is generic in nature, so it's not geared towards a specific type of business, vertical market, and it's also not geared towards a specific size. It will fit anywhere between the very smallest of small businesses, 1 or 2 individuals, all the way up to thousands. And it will lay out a security framework. It is intended to be a generic protection, and if you are in alignment with it, it will answer most, if not all, of the other compliances that exist in the world. We've built our entire tool stack at Kyber around that, so that we could protect whatever type of individuals and companies that we run into out in the world. And I think we live and breathe by that whole, defense in depth strategy. Defense in depth, and you might term it another way as layered approach to defense. You've got to have different pieces in place that are going to answer different requirements. You have passwords. Yeah, everybody has passwords. Are they strong passwords? Are they long? Are they complex? Do they expire where they need to be changed every pick a time period, 90, 120, 180 days? Those are all good things. Well, passwords aren't enough anymore. Do you have multi-factor authentication where you have a code on your cell phone that says, yes, I'm going to authorize the login to this system? Password management, dark web scanning. There's plenty of pieces to that defense in depth to make it as hard as possible for somebody to crack your network. Next. So we got a quick poll question here that we'd like folks to answer. You all have access to a chat link down at the bottom of the screen. Do you know of an organization? It can be one that you work for, could be a friend's But anybody that you've come into contact with who has been breached, we're just trying to get a feel for, are the statistics that we hear and see in the newspapers and on TV every day, are they realistic? Are they accurate? I think it's just an interesting question to understand what people are hearing out there from a cybersecurity perspective and breach.
Seeing some yeses. I haven't seen any no's yet.
That's funny. Yeah, you can respond to the panelists within the chat or respond to all, whatever you're comfortable with. It's fine.
Yeah, all yeses from what I'm seeing.
Not surprised. I mean, it's not a fluke that we get a lot of calls about this stuff. And when we get calls, it's not, they're not enormous companies that are calling us. It's the small to mid-sized businesses, 5 users to 100 users, somewhere in that realm, that are asking for help and trying to figure out, what do they do next. Part of it should be they should be calling their insurance agent to understand what happens on that end. And I'm sure Scott will talk about that, but you got to contain it as quickly as possible, I think, is one of the messages. We'll go to the next slide. Scott, you want to pick up?
All right, absolutely. All right, so very interesting. We probably all have either been part of a breach or we know somebody close to us that's been a part of a breach. It's that small circle that we live in, and we're seeing more and more of it. And right now, that's why cyber insurance is needed more now probably than ever. And it's more than just insurance, though. With the insurance, what happens if you've gone through the process of obtaining insurance policy is really the risk management piece of it, which is probably the most important aspect of preparing for a cyber breach. The insurance policy is there to pay for those expenses that you're going to incur when a breach happens, to make sure that your business doesn't go out of business. And you have to be very careful with the insurance policy that you purchase to make sure that it's proper for your business, as this is a newer exposure and there's no standardization within cyber policies. So there's huge swings in coverages from carrier to carrier, but preparing to that point is probably the most important part. And it's building those defenses, those cyber defenses, to prevent a breach as much as possible. So that you basically don't have to utilize the cyber insurance. And Bob referenced it before that in Connecticut, Connecticut is a little bit front thinking in this aspect, that they're encouraging companies to adopt a framework to prepare for these breaches. And it's very important to manage it from the top down. In the past, what we've seen all too often is that a business owner or a board of directors will delegate this exposure or this threat to their organizations to their IT provider, saying, I don't know anything about cyber. You know what? I'm not an IT guy. So IT, I need you to handle this for me. However, the problem with that is when a breach happens, the attorney general comes knocking on the door and says, what have you done to prepare for this breach? You can't say, well, I delegated it to the IT guy, because they're going to be looking to you for what you've done as a business owner to protect your business from this known threat. And you've obviously known that it's a threat. And that's why it's important to address this from an enterprise cyber risk level. And there's really 3 buckets that you need to address. The first one is that policies and procedures bucket. What policies and procedures have I put into effect? The second one is the IT. What have I done from an IT perspective to protect my business? And then the third one is building a culture and training the employees on what are the threats. How do I build a culture of awareness? What is happening out in the environment, and how do I translate that to my employees? Because any lack in any one of those buckets, you might as well not do anything. You know, you can spend thousands and thousands of dollars on IT. They can be completely circumvented by one employee clicking on a $5 Starbucks gift card. You know, so it's really addressing those three is the most important. And then that cyber liability policy is there when those risk management techniques have failed, and the policy is there to make sure that your business stays afloat, and it's going to pay those expenses that you incur when a data breach happens. So why is it important to think about this? You know, a lot of times you hear businesses say, I'm a small business. I only have 1 or 2 employees, you know, or it's just me. You know, I'm not a target for these guys. These guys aren't coming after me. I'm not a target. I'm not a Sony. You know, but if we look at the numbers, one of the things that we find is that it's actually small businesses are the ones that are falling the most often as a victim to a cyber incident. And then to top that off of, 50% of those ones that have been impacted go out of business because they weren't properly insured or they didn't have the proper risk management techniques put into place to prevent that breach from happening. So that's why it's really important to manage that cyber risk and to have the proper insurance policy there so that if you are part of that 60% of small business that gets hit, that you don't want to be part of the half that end up going out of business because the attack was just too cumbersome on the financials. So the evolution of the cyber policy has changed as this exposure or this threat to your business has changed. When it first started out in the 2000s, it was more of a property loss. You know, we were more concerned about our computers and getting hit with a denial of service attack where, you know, our computers were really the property or the exposure. And then it turned into more of a liability as we started to gather information, that PII, the healthcare information, confidential, any non-public type of information. That started to become the new threat to it, because now with it being on the internet, it could be accessed by the criminals and they could utilize this for financial gain. So it turned more from a property exposure to a liability. So we started to see the business owner policies and the package policies start to endorse onto those policies these coverages. With it being a new exposure, these coverages or these endorsements, again, no standardization. They would just, you know, try to figure out, you know, what's happening. And it was very responsive. And they would add these endorsements, just trying to fill those gaps or those exposures onto those business owners policy. And that was, you know, probably 2010 to the 15s. And then 2015 is when these criminals really started to capitalize. They started to steal the credit card information, the health information, so that they could, you know, get prescription drugs. They could file insurance claims, the personal identifiable information where they're stealing identities. And you know, really, they started to master how to utilize this information and how to gain from this information and how to utilize the dark web and sell this information onto that dark web as well. And because we started to put more stuff online, that our exposures were you know, just doubling. It was just exploding how much information we were having, how much information we were gathering, how we were keeping it. And we weren't keeping up from a defense technology either. So as that happened, the exposure really got to the size where it needed to be addressed as a standalone risk. You couldn't compile it with our property and casualty risk, that we really need to address this risk as a standalone threat to our organization, because it's to that point. And that's when the standalone policies really started to become popular, and businesses started to look at those so that they could customize the policy to protect their unique exposure. So we've gone from this property loss of, you know, our computers and our servers to now it's really more of a liability. That computer or that property exposure is really small, especially considering we put, you know, really have gone away from servers and gone to vendor hosting, to all of the liability that we've accepted by gathering all of this information. And this information is getting broader and broader, and we're even seeing the state laws starting to define it broader and broader as well. It's not just social security numbers or driver's license numbers. You know, now it's email addresses, which, you know, how many email addresses do you have? You know, the exposure is getting to be huge, and managing that exposure can be very difficult. So that's why we're at the standalone policy. So with all of this collection of information, prior to COVID, our threat and what insurance companies would view as the threat is all of that information that you gathered. And that's why the applications always ask, how much PII information do you have? How much health information do you have? How much, corporate information? How much private information or non-public information do you have? That was their concern, because that was the threat of that being stolen and utilized against us or sold against us. And it would be sold on the dark web. And then anytime that was violated, we had to do notification, credit monitoring. There was a lot of expenses that came into it. And that was the way that we addressed it, the risk and how we insured that risk. But when COVID hit, the criminals capitalized on that, and they really changed their tactics on how they came after us or how they monetized from a cyber breach. And rather than hacking in and stealing that information and selling it on the dark web, what they did is they went for the victims themselves. With the workforce being pushed out of the protected net corporate environment, everybody's remoting in through VPNs, through remote desktop tools, that they capitalized on that opportunity, and they would just scan the networks and they would look for these tools and they would just brute force their way in, and they would launch ransomware. And it was much easier for them and much quicker for them to go right after the victim themselves and get the money from the victims, rather than taking that third step and selling it on the dark web. And then to compound that, what they also found is that the insurance policies were paying the ransom. So prior to COVID, typical ransom was probably 5 to 20,000. It was really that business interruption that was much more impactful. Not having access to that network for 2, 3, 4 weeks was much more impactful than a $5,000 or $20,000 ransom. But now that they realize these insurance policies are paying them, the average ransom in 2020 and 2021 was about $250,000, and that just kind of keeps creeping because they know they can keep pushing that needle. And then you compound the business interruption, the legal expenses, and all the other expenses that you incur in a ransomware. That a ransomware attack could easily be $500,000 to $1 million for a small ransomware or small business type of a ransomware event. And then they've also figured out how to morph ransomware to get around the controls. So ransomware 1.0 really is the criminal would just encrypt your data. They had no idea who they got. All they know is they got somebody. They wouldn't know who they got until you responded to that ransom. And what they would do is encrypt your data. So your data was never violated. You never had to do notification, credit monitoring, because really all they did was added an extra layer of protection of encryption. And then you would buy that encryption key to unencrypt your data. But then what they realized is the best control for that was a solid backup. So if you had a solid backup, you just washed your machines of everything, and then you would restore from a backup. So that was the best control. So then, in the criminal cat and mouse game, they figure out how to get around that control. So then that morphed into ransomware 2.0. So ransomware 2.0 started to turn into more of an extortion event. So what they would do with ransomware 2.0 is they would launch the ransomware, and it would sit in the network for typically 2 weeks, for about 2 weeks. And during that time, it would map out the architecture of the network. And then when it would port all of that information back. So now the problem with that is now your information's been violated. They know who they got. And by the way, they would search that information looking for your insurance policy, so they know where to set that ransomware as well. Right. So now you're held to a higher standard of response, because now you got to do notification, credit monitoring. Right. So for the state laws, you're held to a higher standard. And now you can't erase and restore, because what they're going to do is extort you and say, well, if you don't pay us the ransom, then we're going to release this information, all of the information that we've gathered, and we're going to release it, or we're going to sell it. They're going to use that information to their advantage to get you to pay them, because that's all they're interested in. They're only interested in getting paid. And that's what brings us to ransomware 3.0. Is 3.0 is morphing into how do we get paid faster? And that's what they're trying to do, is now they're trying to streamline ransomware so that they can get paid the fastest possible time. So what they'll do is add not only that extortion piece to it, but they add a denial of service attack, so that they're going to hit your network and shut down your network until you pay them, so that they're just trying to speed that process along. And by the way, it's not difficult for these guys. These guys are not, IT gurus at all. You can get ransomware as a service where you just pay a company to do this for you. You pay them 20%. You keep the 80%. So it takes very little effort. It's low risk on them because most of them are either Russian gangs or Eastern European gangs is typically where we see this, where they're protected pretty much by the country. They're not going to prosecute them or put them in jail. Actually, they're bringing in a lot of revenue. So actually the country's kind of like it because they're bringing a lot of revenue into the country. But it's not some guy in his basement with a hoodie, that's attacking it. It's almost treated it as it is treated as a business at this point, where you're going to see, managerial hierarchies. You even see help desk hotlines onto this. So if you have a problem with the encryption key, they help you through the process. I mean, because they don't want word out there that you paid the ransom, you didn't get the encryption key. But on the plus side, we're getting better at it. The Homeland Security and the FBI have common encryption keys, and sometimes you can utilize those. We're getting better from a response from an IT perspective as well. But again, they figure out the controls and they figure out how do we get around those controls. It's the cat and mouse game. It's kind of like radar detectors, right? We started off with the X band, then we went to the Y band, then the XY band, then we went to laser, then we went to pulse, right? It's that cat and mouse game that kind of goes back and forth. And ransomware is just running absolutely rampant right now. And that's really what is changing the cyber liability market. Next slide. So because these insurance companies are paying so much in claims, it has really brought chaos to the cyber insurance market. Prior to COVID, there was a ton of capacity within the market. I mean, all of these carriers wanted cyber. It was new policies. It's not like they were replacing policies. So it was really discounted. The premiums were really low. They were offering high limits. You could get $5-10 million limits. Everybody wanted a piece of this new insurance market. All of the carriers were hungry for the business and they were fighting hard for it. But now that ransomware and the claims started to come in, they really started to test reserves. And now we're starting to see the premiums adjust to where they should be to be able to pay the claims. They're not discounted anymore. You're starting to see, very steep renewals, typical renewals, 20-25%. It's not uncommon even to see 100-200% increase at renewal. It's just the premiums are right sized depending on how discounted it was. And then in response to that, we're seeing the carriers really start to reduce capacity. They won't put those 5 and 10 million limits. So put 1 or 3 million, and then you have to build excess on top of that in order to get proper limits. So they're reducing their exposure from a carrier standpoint. And then the pricing obviously is escalating. And then we're seeing a lot of players exit the market. We're seeing a lot of the carriers non-renew their book of business at renewal because they're just getting hit with the claims. They didn't really have enough actuarial information to figure out how to do this. And then it's also affecting coverage, where we're seeing a lot of endorsements and exclusions put on in the direct response to the claims that they're paying. The NotPetya breach, the SolarWinds breach, the Microsoft Exchange breach, like these big breaches, we're seeing the carriers put those types of exclusions onto these policies. Or because of ransomware, we're seeing that sub-limited down. So you'll get $1 million policy and it'll be sub-limited to 500,000, or they'll add co-insurance to it. So you have to really be careful on those policies because they'll hide these things into it. So you really want to be aware of it. They'll add, 25% co-insurance to it, just the ransomware piece of it, or the extortion piece of it. So the ransomware claims are really changing the cyber insurance market in a negative way. However, one of the positives is we're seeing insurtechs come out of this, where insurers are starting to use technology in order to underwrite, and they're using technology to streamline their business. They bring their costs down to try to keep the premium pricing down. So it's an interesting change in the market as well that we're seeing. And then on the next slide, what we're seeing as well is the carriers are looking for more and more controls. and I'm sure that, Kyber can definitely confirm this, but you're going to see longer applications, and you're going to be looking for a lot more controls that you need to be implemented. And if you don't have those controls, they won't even write your business. They're not even interested into it. Or if you don't have those controls at renewal, they'll non-renew you. We've seen a lot of that as well. So 4 key controls that the carriers are looking for right now is number one is multi-factor authentication. And what multi-factor authentication is it's using 2 forms of authentication to log in. And you could be logging into email, into an online vendor, into your computer, almost into anything. And it's using 2 forms and it's usually 2 of 3 things. It's something you know, something you are, or something that you have. A great example is you go buy gas, you use your credit card, something you have, they ask you for your zip code, something that you know, right? So it's using those 2 forms. Most common that we see is your password, and then it'll shoot a pin to your cell phone, and then you put the pin in. So something you know is the password, something that you have is your pin. But it could be something that you are. It could be your thumbprint, it could be an iris, it could be, something biometrical as well. They'll use that or your voice. Actually, I had that yesterday where I was setting up an account and it used my voice as dual factor authentication as well. But why multi-factor authentication is important is I describe it as the club. I mean, the criminals can easily get through multi-factor authentication, but it's an extra step, so when they see it, they just move on to the next easier target. They don't waste their time unless it's a target that they really want. If it's somebody that they're targeting, they want it, they're going to get through it. But that's just one control. The second thing that carriers look for is having encryption. And encryption can be 2 things. It can be data at rest or data in motion. Data at rest is anything that's sitting on your computer. It's sitting on your laptop. It's sitting on a hard drive, removable hard drive, a thumb drive, anything that's portable is data at rest. And why that's important is if that laptop is stolen, lost, thumb drive, whatever is lost, they deem that as unrecoverable. And you get safe harbors in a few states that you don't have to do notification, Connecticut being one of them. You don't have to provide notification and credit monitoring to the data that was on that laptop because they feel that that data is unrecoverable. So you get a little bit of safe harbor there as well. And then data in motion is emails, right? So if we're sending in any type of email that has confidential, non-public information, you should be using an encryption service to send that email. That way, if it gets grabbed during transmission, it's unuseful to whoever grabs it. But that's a common way of obtaining information as well. The third one is patch scheduling. And what patch scheduling is having a schedule that when patches or updates come out, that they get installed. And the reason why this is important, and one of the things that we've found from a claims perspective, is that IT will hold on to patches until they build up. And the reason is it takes time to install the patches. They're generally done on the weekend because you have to bring the system down and reboot it. So they like to gather them. But the problem with that is the patches fix a known threat or a known weakness within the system. So the longer you hold on to it, the longer you're vulnerable to that. And we've seen a lot of breaches. The NotPetya breach was this. The Microsoft Exchange breach was this, that they targeted those known holes within systems. So those that patched didn't get hit with that breach. Those that didn't patch were the ones that fell victim to those breaches. So patch scheduling is very important to reduce that time between when a patch is released to the installation of that patch or update. And then the fourth one is immutable backups, sometimes referred to as air gap backups. And what this is backups that are not attached to your system. So if your system gets breached, it doesn't spread to the backup. And that's the key, right? Because again, we can wipe data, restore from a backup, but if that backup gets infected, it's worthless to us. It doesn't help. So it's important to have solid backups that are not attached to our systems. So that's what the immutable backups is.
And I think another piece of that, Scott, is not just having those backups, but making sure the backups are actually tested.
Great point.
We've heard so many instances where, and I think the pipeline was a perfect example of this. They said,
yes.
we have some backups, but we can't restore fast enough, or we're going to lose so much data because the current backups are unfit for restore. And
Yes, and that's something we saw in claims as well. And what was really interesting with it is we saw how inadequate backups were. We were seeing, backups still done on tape. And then, they're trying to restore from the backup, and the tape, obviously has been written over so many times it's worthless. And that was definitely a huge weakness that we saw, that the backups failed. Hard drives, thumb drives that we're backing up to would fail very often. Great point. And those controls also came from, and the reason that these carriers are looking for it is actually it came from a meeting from President Biden. And what happened was he reached out to private industry and he said, ransomware is running rampant through our businesses. We need help trying to curtail this, or trying to get our hands around and how to stop it from spreading and from all of our businesses falling victim to it. So he reached out to the private business, and in particular, he reached out to the insurance carriers, and he brought 4 insurance carriers to the table. And it was Coalition, Reassurance, or Assurance, and Travelers, and I don't remember who the 4th one was. And their response was, it's going to come down to controls. We have to have these businesses implement these controls and help them and guide them into putting these controls into place. And that's part of what NIST is about. It's building that framework of enterprise cyber risk management, and it gives you the tools to be able to implement these things. And that's why NIST is a great one to utilize to build those or fill those buckets in there as well. And that's where insurance fits into this. And that's kind of what I'm talking about, is the risk management piece of this is the most important thing. The insurance comes in when those fails. So these insurance policies are going to help you with the controls. They're being a lot more proactive now. They used to be very reactive. They only were triggered in the event of a claim, but now they're realizing that if they're more proactive, that they're going to reduce a lot of these claims. So they'll give you access to a lot of the tools to help you fill those buckets. They'll give you discount to services, to do pen testing and to implement MFA and all of those different controls that you should have implemented. They'll help you implement those tools. Some of these insurtechs will do scans of your network and identify any weaknesses or any vulnerabilities so that you're aware of it. You can share it with your IT guys, and they can fill those gaps as well. So the insurance policies are not only reactive, paying those expenses that you incur when a breach happens, but they're also being a lot more proactive, giving you access and tools in order to build those layers of defense. So on the next slide, it shows those expenses that you're going to incur when a data breach happens. There's a lot to it, and there's first party and there's third party expenses that you're going to incur. Forensics is going to go in there and really determine, how did the breach happen? What was impacted? What was violated? How do we stop this breach? How do we get back to prior breach status? Obviously you're going to have legal advice. You're going to be doing notification and credit monitoring, which is in every single state law that's out there. Currently, I think there's 54 different state laws, including the territories right now. But each one of those has notification, credit monitoring as part of their state law. Public relations, Bob spoke to this earlier, that, if you are in the news or because you're notifying, you want to put a positive spin onto it so it doesn't damage your reputation. We're doing all the right things. This is what happened and this is how we're controlling it. That positive spin you need onto it when a breach happens. These are paying business interruptions as well, because that can be very impactful when you're down for 2, 3, 4 weeks. You still need to make those operating costs, make payroll, loss of profits. Those things, these insurance policies pay for that. They also have dependent business interruption too. So if you're dependent on a vendor in order to operate your business, they get taken down. They're unable to provide that service to you. They'll pay for that business interruption loss. Ransomware, they pay the ransomware as well. Loss of money and theft is a very interesting one, because that is technically a crime coverage that you're seeing tucked into these cyber policies. And what that means is a crime policy protects the money that you're responsible for. Money's the trigger. That's what needs to be indemnified. So that's what we're seeing in these wire fraud, invoice manipulation, man in the middle, it goes by a lot of different names, but that's when you're conned out of the money. You send the money to them. They didn't take it from you. And there's a lot of gray areas. There's actually two sides to it. The crime side of it is, when you fall victim to it, you send the money. These cyber policies will have coverage in there that will indemnify those lost funds, but it also covers the flip side of it. And the flip side is the cyber. And cyber, anytime we talk cyber, is about information and data. And that's when they purport to be you and they con somebody else out of the money, right? They don't have a crime policy. So they come back and say, well, you're partially responsible for this loss because you failed to secure your email server, right? So now they've used your data cyber maliciously against you. And it triggers the cyber policy to pay your legal fees, pay the forensics, to determine how do they do it. And then it also will pay the damages if so assessed, right? So that theft piece of it is a whole nother little nuance that we're seeing, again, a ton of claims in. But it's a little bit of crime coverage that you'll see tucked into these cyber policies. Very beneficial, something to look for often, almost always actually. It's sublimited. You'll see it sublimited usually at about 100, 250,000. Again, that's the carrier limiting their exposure because they, again, are paying so many of these claims. I would say outside of ransomware, that's the second most common claim that I see. Especially in real estate and manufacturing. It's insane what's going on. And then third-party expenses, legal defenses, settlements and damages, contract obligations, regulatory fines and regulations that you might get hit with as well. So that insurance policy is there to pay for those expenses that are incurred during a data breach to make sure that your business doesn't fall victim to that 50% that go out of business. That's why it's important to have that insurance policy, and more important, to make sure that that insurance policy is really protecting your particular risk, because every business has a different type of risk, and you really need to make sure that the policy is reflective of your particular risk. So on the next page, we've talked about some of this, that the carriers will give you access to be able to implement a lot of these controls, but these are the controls that they typically are looking for on these applications. And these controls can impact our premium. By having more of these controls in place, we've seen up to a 15 or a 20% reduction in premiums if you've had really good controls in place, versus having horrible controls. If they do a scan and they just find all of these holes, that premium just skyrockets, or it's a declination. They won't even offer you a quote. And that multi-factor, we've talked about email authentication. We talked about the type of technology you have. Disabling, that's an important one too, is if you're not using remote desktop protocols, the RDP, then disable them, because that's an easy way for them to get in. And that is one of the things that they are looking for. They are scanning, looking for those ports. Unsupported software, again, patching, making sure that it's supported. Using unsupported is, it's a big no-no, because that's a real easy way for them to get into your system. Defining administrative privileges. One of the things that we've really found is that we give everybody administrative privileges. Not everybody needs administrative privileges. We really need to define privileges to job function. By having everybody with administrative privileges, they can, run rampant through the network if they access one of those persons. Even like the copier, printer / scanner, right? That has administrative function because it can read, write, it can move things around. So you really need to define who has administrative privileges and who has the right privileges, dependent upon their job function. Having a designated CIO function is very critical now, because it falls into a lot of different frameworks, number one, but it's starting to pop into different state laws as well. You really need to have a designated person that oversees this risk and oversees it from an enterprise risk level, whether it be a CIO or somebody has to have that responsibility or wear that hat, because you need complete oversight from policies, procedures, IT perspective, and training. Again, those three buckets. You really need one person that has oversight and is addressing the entire risk. Pen testing, again, is critical, looking for those holes or those weaknesses within the organization. And pen testing can come in three different phases, right? There's the IT one where they try to hack into your network looking for those weaknesses. There's something called social engineering, where you can hire a company to try use phishing techniques, and they can call. We saw a lot of towns fall victim to the phishing technique where they call asking for W-2s. So it's trying to con your employees out of information. And then the third one's physical penetration, right? A guy will show up in a polo that says, tech company onto it and see how fast he can get into the server room and access the information or onto somebody's computer. You can actually hire a guy to do that. By the way, if you ever find those guys at a party, they have the greatest stories. And then the last one is doing an assessment and a vulnerability. Just hiring a company to come in and do an assessment. What do I have from an IT perspective? How do I protect that information? It's a very holistic view of your organization as it relates to technology. And a lot of this comes into the policies as well. Even if you look at the information security policies, really just taking that holistic view. How do we gather data? Does it come email, data dumps, through the mail? What type of data do we get? Is personal identifiable? Is it health information? How does it flow through the organization? Does everybody have access to it? Do we limit who has access? Does it go up to the cloud? Does it go to the server? Where do we store it? And then how long do we hold on to it? Do we hold on to it for too long, which really expands our exposure? And then how do we destroy it? Do we delete? Do we shred? Do we destroy hard drives before they leave our building? How do we get rid of that data? Really just taking a holistic view of the data and how it relates to our business.
You use one specific word there, flow, and that data flow is a huge thing. We see it on questionnaires every single day that we get these. Does anybody have a mapping of their data flows, both in and out of their business? And it is very rare for somebody to answer yes to that. And some people think it's not really important, but for all the points that you just listed, trying to understand where your risk is and where the data exists on your network and where it's traveling to is a huge thing to get your arms around.
Yeah, nope, absolutely. It's really just understanding your relationship with data, right? And that falls into the policies and procedures. What policies and procedures should I have in place? Do I have my password policy? Do I have my bring your own device policy, incident response plan? One of the most critical documents that you could possibly have. The incident response policy, I refer to it almost like the fire drill, right? If there's a fire, we know what to do. We get out of the building, we call 911, fire trucks come, they put out the fire, we call the insurance guy, the adjusters. We know how to recover from a fire. We know how to do it for 100 years. But, if there's a cyber breach, we can't call 911. Quite honestly, they don't care. So who do we call? Who's on my disaster recovery? Who's my cyber attorney? Who's my IT? Who's my forensics? Who's everybody that's going to be responding to my cyber breach? I need that at my fingertips. And also not on the computer. It should be a hard copy, because chances are you're not going to have access to that computer as well. So that is probably one of the most important documents to have, because that is really going to reduce your period of restoration, so that you can respond quickly and efficiently and not be focused on the data breach and back to business. Can't stress how important that document is. What's my disaster recovery plan? All of those policies and procedures into place should all be reviewed and all created. And there's a lot of great tools out there to create those as well. Know how many numbers, how many records you have. What is my risk? What is my exposure? And then, we've talked about the testing and the training as well. I know we're running a little short on time, so I'm going to move on. So we'll go to poll number 2. Within the last year, have you reviewed your coverage as it relates to your organization? Have you taken a look to make sure that you have coverage out there, so that if you were breached, how it would respond, and would it be enough to respond to that type of a breach? We'll give it a couple seconds for answers. We're hearing crickets.
That was great information, Scott. Holy cow, you ripped through a lot there, but I don't know how you did it, but you did it. It was there's a lot to be covered there. There's a lot to think about.
Yeah, well, this is it's a large
changing. Yep. It's been a changing landscape, really. And that's what we're trying to get people to understand.
Yeah.
So just a few things as we wrap up here. some tips to try to improve your cyber readiness. Because we're seeing these questionnaires come in every day, and clients are asking us to help answer the questions, guide them as to what's important. You got to do your due diligence. You have to know, go back to data flows. You have to know what you have and what there is to protect and what your current risk situation is. It sounds like an easy thing to do, have an inventory of software and hardware assets. People call us. I had this discussion 2 weeks ago with a client that was getting ready for an IT security audit from their CPA firm. I said, okay, just tell me what you need. She said, here's a questionnaire. Went through the questionnaire, and I punched up in our remote monitoring and management tool, ran the reports, gave her a complete software list for every machine and a complete hardware asset list. It should be, at this point in time, push of a button type of stuff if you've got the right tools in place. MFA, as Scott said, this is huge. And, some folks will say, well, we put MFA on some of the accounts at Microsoft Office. Well, some of the accounts you probably shouldn't have done it at all if you're not going to do all the accounts. They will find the one that is not protected. It's almost too easy to crack Microsoft Office 365 right now if you don't have MFA. They can find your credentials on the dark web. They could plug them in from anywhere because of Outlook Web Access. Anywhere in the world, they can basically pop in your domain or your email address, and they can figure out what the account is. Now they just got to hack the password, and they will get it. Especially if you've got a 8-character or less password, forget it. I mean, they'll get it in 30 minutes. That's easy. That's easy pickings for them. Scott talked about this too. Have an incident response. I should go back to that MFA just 1 second. Not just Microsoft Office 365 or Google or whatever your mail of choice is, should be protecting your network login. And it absolutely ought to be protecting your VPN connection for remote access. Remote access is a wide open door if you don't have that. And now you're letting somebody inside your network where all your confidential data is. Incident response, I couple this incident response plan, which is, of course, if you have a breach, if you have malware on your systems, we could expand this infinitely, but how do you respond? How do you respond in an orderly, not hair on fire method? And you could couple disaster recovery planning and business continuity planning. How do I get my business back up and running after an incident, after a disaster, and how can I be functional? I can't wait 2 weeks to get new equipment in, to wipe everything clean, to reload from scratch, to figure out if I have to pay a ransom because my backup's no good to get my data. All those things will be avoided or limited if you've got a really good plan and it's written. And most importantly, once a year, you got to test. You got to pick a piece of it and test it. Figure out, wow, if we had done this, it would have gone faster. Okay, add some notes to the plan, revise. And defense in depth, I talked about this before. You got to have layers of protection, and then, 2 things at the end of the line. You got to have good backups, and you got to have insurance to have your back for whatever is unforeseen. Next slide. Might be the last slide. Oh, it is. We put something together for anybody that's here on this call or anybody that's going to get the recording. We can do an assessment, a no charge assessment of your security posture to try to understand exactly how you match up against the NIST cybersecurity framework. You can get immediate information out of that. We're on the phone. This doesn't have to take huge amounts of time. A lot of these we can do in 30 to 60 minutes, run through the questions, dump the data overnight to a report, and give you truly actionable items that say, hey, if you did this, you'd be much more secure. If you had these 3 pieces in place, you would have better risk rating. Better risk rating translates to savings on cyber insurance automatically. In the chat box, we pasted in a link to, it'll take you to a form on our website, and you could fill in and just make a request, and we could set up and schedule a time to do something like this. Anything else from your end, Scott?
No. Open it up to questions. Does anybody have questions that we can help you out with? We're kind of running right to the line, but happy to answer questions.
Yeah, sure enough. Pop them in the Q&A, pop them in the chat box. We can do anything. If people think of questions, they can send them into that marketing address, and we can answer them after the fact if somebody is bashful about it, or if they come up with something afterwards.
I have added the marketing email address into the chat for anyone who does come up with questions afterwards. No, this was a lot of information, but thank you everyone for your time today. Appreciate your attention. Thank you, Scott and Bob, for all that great information. And we look forward to helping anybody out who has some concerns about where they might fit from a cybersecurity standpoint or ability to get a comprehensive insurance plan in place. So thank you, everyone, and have a fantastic day.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks very much for joining, folks.